Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar today, Unlocking the Power of TA Metrics, the ROI is Real. My name is Jessica Oberto, and I'm the Director of Process and Implementation at People Science. I'll be your moderator for the next hour. You'll find that these webinars are more conversational between our panel guests, so at any point during today's discussion, if you have a question or something you'd like to bring up, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to make sure we get back to you. So let's get started and introduce our guest speaker and panelists today. So as always, our webinar presenter is Christine Nicholas, founder and CEO of People Science and HireGate. Christine founded People Science back in 1997 to help companies solve their toughest recruiting challenges. Since then, People Science has partnered with many HR and TA departments over the last 27 years, many of which are Fortune 100 companies, as well as startups, in developing and executing recruitment strategies, enhancing their recruiting processes, and creating solutions to fill tough recruitment challenges. And this month, our special guest with us is Kathryn Zaki. Kathryn is the head of Global TA for Cisco Meraki. As an experienced global TA leader, Kathryn connects business needs with ideas and people to create talent solutions. With worldwide technology leader Cisco, she's created and executed strategic HR, TA, and talent mobility initiatives for over a decade, while seeing the organization transform into a leading edge model of a network business in an ever-evolving world. Her background is a mix of HR experience in addition to TA, including HR business partnership, communications, operations, and diversity and inclusion. With over 10 years of global experience and an MBA in international business, Kathryn has a strong understanding of the worldwide market. Since joining Cisco in 2008, Kathryn has developed an enterprise model-wide internal movement strategy that has laid the groundwork for talent to move fluidly toward the highest priority areas of the organization and is being adopted as part of Cisco's talent strategy. This has enhanced employee growth and engagement, along with significant savings for the organization. Previously, she developed and implemented region-specific talent attraction strategies, collaborating with numerous stakeholders in the EMER region. She's also advised the Cisco Disabilities Awareness Network, ERG, and has launched new chapters in Europe and India, contributing to Cisco being a top company for people with disabilities by Diversity, Inc. in 2009. So welcome, Kathryn. We're so happy to have you with us today. And with that, Christine, I will hand it over to you to get things started.
Tremendous bio. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. This is my favorite Wednesday of the month. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for our population that just continues to grow. So excited to be here with Kathryn. I actually met Kathryn last year at hr.com, right, Kathryn? And I just want to paint the scene because I'm always trying to attend different types of HR events, which are greatly stocked with really good HR leaders. And then there's like one TA leader. And sometimes they're okay, and other times they're like, how can I get into HR? So, right? So what I really found was, I'm like, wait a minute, Cisco Meraki, and she's got this great background. And I was not disappointed in the least. You walk into the room to this smart person who really gets it. Anybody who follows Reimagine and follows People Science knows that it's our mission really to elevate talent acquisition. I'm going to talk about metrics in just a second and where we are, but our economies are so dependent on it. And really, we are sorely, sorely lacking talent acquisition leadership. And I know if you're out there right now and you're looking for a position that, ouch, that hurts, especially TA leaders and recruiters that are in that position right now. But I can tell you, I did a poll on LinkedIn. There's a 38% increase this week as compared to last Thursday on LinkedIn with TA positions that are open. TA leadership made up 6% of that, which I think is a good sign, right? So even though we're in this change, in this process of change and talent acquisition, keep getting educated, keep staying on the cutting edge, because we really need good talent acquisition. And I think Kathryn's be a great mentor. I know you'll learn a lot from her. I know I have. So thank you for being here. So let's cut right to the chase on statistics. So the unemployment rate the unemployment rate went up in February for the first time in a long time to 3.9. I think the last time we saw this was like 2017 or so, maybe little bit further back than 2019. So it's interesting to see that it's coming up. Whereas the other two indicators that we look at, the jobs opening, stayed pretty much consistent. So we had job openings of 63 million, which is pretty much very similar to what we saw in December and November. Now, those numbers just run through January. The next report on that will be coming out April 2nd. And then the third number that we always look at is employment added. So in the month of February, we added 275,000 more jobs. So if we look at it this way, if we look at April, and we did see the unemployment number come up a little bit, but we go back and look at the jobs added, which has stayed pretty consistent, but again, only through the end of the year going into January. And then the same thing with the amount of employment and payroll coming down just a hair. I'm not sure what we're going to see. I do know one thing. We are not going to see a great fall off. And yesterday was the first day that I saw throughout media that we're not looking at a recession. The major indicators, 67% of the financial world is now saying no soft landing. We're just plowing through this. It's a whole new world. It's a whole new world economy, and it's a whole new world in talent acquisition. I think one of the things that we fail to realize in the TA profession is how responsible we are for that. You know, we were at Transform last week. Remember this, Jessica? We did a roundtable on the same topic. And, you know, the resounding theme was, yeah, but what can I do? Well, if we don't address this, if the Kathryns and the people out there that are working or aspiring to work or whatever the case is, if we don't change it, somebody else is going to. And who knows more about talent acquisition than we do? It's us, right? So pay close attention to those numbers because the rest of the world is, right? So even if we know or don't feel like they're accurate to us at this point, it is a good snapshot. It's the only snapshot we have. So that's where we are with the metrics. Jess, can you put that slide up for me?
Yes.
So when Kathryn and I were prepping, we were talking about diversity. Woohoo! I mean, who isn't for diversity? Do you know anybody who says, I don't care about diversity? But are we putting our money where our mouth is? Having just come back from Transform a week and a half ago and having participated in some other diversity initiatives, the funding for for diversity initiatives seems to be decreasing. The positions that were put in place seem to be going away, kind of dissipating into other positions. So, you know, when we look at what has happened with diversity, we saw that big push coming into 2019, 2020, 2021. 2022, moving the needle, and now I think we're in a pause. We have come a long way, baby. I actually wrote an article about that, but we are in a bit of a pause. And that's a topic that we'll probably explore further down this year as we get a few more months under our belt. If you are a diversity leader and you'd like to come on Reimagine Talent and talk to us, we'd love to hear from you. So that's where we are. But when diving into the numbers yesterday at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this popped up and it really threw me for a loop. So this is a grid showing this salary discrepancy between men and women. And I know we've talked about this, you know, like I was saying earlier, Kathryn, maybe if we compare 2022 to 2023, it might be, yay, we're moving the needle, but this is disgraceful. And it really, is there a reason for this, that men are paid so much more than women? So as we think about diversity, let's not forget that diversity is a very broad piece, right? And different things are needed to be brought to the table. But this is really where we are when it comes to men and women in power in the workforce. We talk about it, but we aren't there yet. So good to keep that in mind. Any comments about that? You can see at the top, it's architecture and engineering, computer. Look, that's insane that computer and mathematical positions have that much of a disparity. I mean, in the legal profession, we've seen a lot of people a lot of women leave the legal profession and maybe even open their own practices, which may account for some of that, but certainly not enough for it to be, you know, to the extent that it is now. Management, which is where you have to move the needle to move the other needles. So this is, you know, just maybe what we should do is send this along with the deck this month. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we'll send you this pull out so you can take a look. Maybe use it in your own conversations with your own people. Cool. A big topic that we always like to talk about is RTO, return to work, what's happening and what isn't. I want to give you some statistics, but I will tell you what I heard at HR Transformed. It was pretty much the resounding theme. Still confusion. So you'd be sitting there with a global leader of people, and they'd be saying, it's just not in the cards for us. And then you'd be sitting there with another global leader who's like, we've always been remote. I think understanding what flex work is and understanding our employees and understanding how to meet their needs effectively and really understanding the effect that your policies, your RTO policies have on your population is what's dictating what individual organizations are doing. The recommendation that I heard loudly from two different individuals there was make it your own. Do what works for your organization, right? And really look at your population and pull them and spend the time that it takes to know. Also, there's no quick fix to this, right? It's not as though, okay, this is the solve. We tried that, right? So we saw Jamie Dimon, we saw a lot of the finance, and they're the ones that have brought more people back in than anybody else, right? Since we're close to New York, we hear about that more often. But then we see that kind of bounce back and forth, even in big tech. So before you make a proclamation, take your time. There's no reason to rush into it. Here's some of the stats though. 75% of the Fortune 100 have a hybrid situation. That's a big number. 45% of the Fortune 100 have reduced their office size since 2020. And we don't know what the ramification is yet on that, but I think we're going to hear a lot about it at the end of this year. 12% of the Fortune 100 have declared they don't require any office visits per week. 12% are saying you don't have to come in. 21% require 3 office visits a week. 3 times as many Fortune 100 companies, or 27%, require 1 to 3 visits to the office per week. Then companies that require full-time work in the office is only 9%. So only 9% of the Fortune 100s are saying you've got to be here all the time. 5 Fortune 100 companies have declared they will not make an official return to office date and will not require official attendance. So I think that's smart. Don't throw the stake in the ground unless you know where you're going. Next topic. Anything to add? Jess, have anything to add about that? Kathryn, anything you're seeing or hearing about return to work at this point?
For me, I think it's just, there's a job for every person, right? And a company for every person. So I know some people that like going into the office. They want to be in face-to-face meetings and see that. So there's others, again, that would prefer to work from home and they feel they're more productive that way. I think employers just need to find out what their target candidate base is looking for and try to steer their return to office policies in those directions.
Yep. And from our perspective, obviously we have technology that enables remote work. And at the same time, we have to understand that if we're asking people to come back into the office, which we have not done, we have to give them a reason that's more meaningful than spending time at home and being productive from home might be. So understanding the reasons why you're trying to get folks into the office and making it a compelling argument. I think me having lived overseas, I've got one of my team members who's over in India, who's on the webinar today, actually. We have to understand that cultures behave differently as well. And so the work culture in different places around the world for a global company, we have to take those into consideration too before making any RTO mandates.
Right. I think that comes down to certainly the younger worker to the population. Until very recently, I haven't seen stats since maybe 2019 saying that so many people meet their friends, their spouses, especially in the tech arena, that's been the experience at work. So what's going to take the place of that? Or is that instigating younger workers to want to come into the office because of the loneliness factor and meeting their friends? And I think the other thing is, even if you do it virtually, if you go back to the diversity fact, once you leave school, whether it's college, tech school, high school, whatever the case, your population of friends look and think a lot like you. And the only place that you're really exposed to diversity is in the workforce. So if that doesn't light a bit of a fire for diversity, I don't know what does. But really, the workforce is where we spread these kind of unique ideas and opportunities. Okay, moving on to AI. Everybody just take a big sigh of relief, right? We've gotten over that, oh my God, ChatGPT can do this for me, which is so awesome, and it's making things easier. But I was really happy to be at Transform and hear some of the comments of the analysts, right? Because it's always a hot topic. Everybody wants to know about AI. But this conference was different in the respect that people are taking a breath and saying, wait a minute, I don't have to fear this. It is technology. That's what it is. It's technology. Are there concerns? Yeah, but it's not going away. So we need to embrace it and we need to assimilate it just like we assimilated the PC, just like we've assimilated other tools, and look at how it can move the needle and change things for us in our own businesses. A caution that I will give is that I see a lot of, in case you don't know, we look at pretty much every talent acquisition technology that's out there and a lot of HRIS systems, point systems and platforms. And we happen to operate our RPO side in a lot of those systems. I can tell you that there's a lot of bright, shiny objects out there, and our IT group meets once a month to review these with me now. And 90% of the technology doesn't work yet. So careful. That hasn't gotten better since AI has come out. It's gotten worse. And I'm seeing large funding dollars go to what's going to be, not what is today. So you have to ask your question, you know, ask yourself, if this is a good tool for me, is it truly a good tool? Where does it fit my tech stack? If I am their first client or their second client or their third client, can I mitigate that risk with really good pricing? That would be my number one recommendation. At the same time, I would also say most technologies like our technology hierarchy have embedded AI features in them. So you're already getting AI that you may not even know about. Many ATSs have already put that into their cadre, right? But a lot of these point systems and hierarchy being different, and especially newer technologies, I think it's tougher when you look at some of the more traditional technologies. It's harder for them, even though they have more data, which makes AI more effective. More data, the better, right? But making sure that their systems are created to allow for these easy plugins of AI. Cool. Any thoughts, questions? No. Okay. So let's talk about metrics and the power of metrics. So I have my favorites. Bess has her favorites. Kathryn has her favorites too, right? But let's start it out that way, and just talk about what are the metrics that matter the most when it comes to building ROI. First off, congratulations for being on the call, everybody, for understanding that talent acquisition does have a big ROI, and it's the metrics that get us there, right? So Kathryn, what's your favorite, or or maybe you can tell us a story about how you've used ROI to advance your position or the position of the organization you're TA.
Yeah, so for me, just a little bit of background. I am a huge data nerd, self-described data nerd. I like to be able to understand the reasons why things are the way they are, but I also love outcomes. So for me, the metrics that matter the most are the ones that are actually driving outcomes. It's being able to say, how were we able to close a gap for the business and getting them either the skills that they needed, the humans that they needed to, solve a customer support issue or whatever it may be. I don't like to track a lot of actions as metrics. I see a lot of times recruiter KPIs are how many times did you log into a tool or whatever the thing may be. I care less about how many times you logged into the tool. I care about what the outcome was from that login. So that's just a little bit of context in terms of my mindset around a lot of the tooling and the metrics. Favorite KPI or an ROI story. I just touched on kind of our customer support thing. When I stepped into this role about 2 years ago-ish, we had a gap of 250 customer support heads talent that we were down in order to support our customers' needs. We were getting escalations left, right, and center. And within 2-3 months, we were able to close that gap. And then that obviously we can calculate that to a return on investment for the business of being able to bring on recruiters to bring that talent in and close the gap there. So while I'm not going to give you specific numbers, that's one that's really able from a business perspective. I sit within the business. I don't sit within talent acquisition. So them being able to say, we invested in you and you helped us close this need, which then got us more, customer reinvestment or whatever it may be. That was a huge one for us.
I love the fact that you sit in with the business. So did that make it easier to determine how much it was? The term we use here is cost of vacancy. Like how much was it really costing the company to have one or all of those seats open?
Yeah. And I think it just made it more real. So easier. I think it's easy, relatively easy to assess in any given scenario if you take the time to step back and do it. But we were able to much more viscerally feel the pain of the fact that that gap was happening because we were sitting there and hearing it on a day-to-day basis with the business. So then that created the urgency that we needed to then be able to say, okay, here's what we need to solve your issue for you. And that's not even the right way to frame it, to solve your issue with you, right? We can't do it without them too. So.
Well, I think you just said it. You felt the pain. So it isn't their issue, it's your issue too, which is so much different than throwing it over the fence or opening the job requisition and then saying, and the HM saying, this is what I want, and then it coming to talent acquisition. It's that bond, don't you think, that makes all the difference?
Sure. For sure. That has been the secret sauce that we've had at Cisco Meraki, is that business partnership for sure. And then there's also the incumbency on us to be able to be good stewards of the investment that they're making in talent acquisition, to do right by them and advise them appropriately. So.
And I think that's one of the things you talked about. I mean, our recruiting team goes by talent advisor too. And I know that's a term that you use too. And I like that because even when we bring in more junior talent into our organization, just the term talent advisor, I think changes the headset on the way we think about things.
For sure. We across all of Cisco, we up-leveled all of our recruiters with talent advisor training supported by Gartner. I'm not just telling you what it was. And it was really great because it gave them the ability to say, we're not just doing things in a transactional way. It taught all of our recruiters to be able to use data to influence hiring decisions, both from their own perspective to help them understand how to be more effective as recruiters, but also to take data on talent market availability and that sort of a thing back to their hiring leaders to help influence where they could make decisions. We actually haven't, at the Cisco Meraki side, haven't necessarily taken up to using talent advisor as we speak about it within the business, because the business knows who we are and how we partner with them. And so they don't need us to change that title for them to understand the framing of what it is that we do to support them as advisors.
So that term, I mean, and how can anyone ever advise anything without metrics? Right. That's
especially in a technology organization, right? A technology organization, we love our data. Engineers love their data, and being able to influence them, we have to take it to them.
And I think, you know, it's always surprising to me when we come into an organization and there aren't a lot. And I think one of the biggest challenges in TA, some of the reasons we created HireGate, is because there aren't metrics to say everything that we do, right? It picks up when the applicant, tracking really for most organizations picks up when the applicant applies and goes from there. And then everybody's mad at their ATS, which is amazing to me because it's doing its job. It's an applicant tracking system. It doesn't say recruiter production tracking. It doesn't say market conductor. It doesn't say, tell me what my challenges are. It just says the applicant's applying and they're going through the system. And then we kind of try and makeshift out of it and then get mad at it because it doesn't do it. When really it was the game changer when we had no technology really in any kind of mass market situation until like 04, 05. We started to see Taleo and really up its game. There were some others out there, but really when you started to see ATSs come into the framework, and now that's just a dated part of the entire picture, right? And one of the challenges I think that was really clear listening to a tech panel at HR Transform is how point systems come in and they give you data. And like you said, you're looking at a recruiter saying, well, I don't care how many times how do you care really how many times they plugged into, no offense, Seek Out, right? Because that's not telling you what the results were from a tool, which I think Seek Out, by the way, is a great tool. It's one of the partner tools that we use for HireGate. But if I can't at the end of the year say, Seek Out provided X amount of dollars for me, for us, and here's how, then I'm going to have a hard time defending that with finance. Right. So when we look at these point systems, I think it's really important, even, you know, LinkedIn in particular, only game in town. I mean, we're talking to a company that's getting ready to write a check for $2 million to LinkedIn. And the question was, are you getting your ROI? And the response was, it's the only game in town. We have no bargaining power. So without a good tracking system. And by the way, a lot of recruiters, yeah, we have a tracking system. I don't want to keep pushing our tool. I do want to say though, recruiters track this data. They feel like they know what it is because it's in their brain, or they're using spreadsheets, or they're using, you know, some of the power tools from Microsoft and different kinds of places to get there. They just need to understand the importance of keeping them and keeping them accurately so that they can get their hands on them quickly to say, okay, this tool is doing this and this one isn't. Because imagine if that same customer, and actually this is what the customer said to me, if we can go back and we can say 60% of our hires came and our cost per hire was $6,000 on LinkedIn. How can you get me a rate down to 5,000 next year? That changes the story. And when you've got that kind of power, it's kind of hard for us in TA to be negated every time the wind blows in a different direction and a layoff has to happen, right? I mean, that's one of the things we talked about. We have these value. One of the detractors from coming into talent acquisition is that it does fluctuate. And until recently, you know, boom market, bust market, all the recruiters go, boom market, hurry up, bring them back in. I was pretty impressed to hear that there were 2 CEOs, and this was in the tech sector, Kathryn, maybe you can say if you've heard this. So I saw 2 CEOs sitting with their chief people officers and saying that they went into, I guess it was 2020, end of 2021, saying hire like crazy, just hire a lot of people. And the chief people officer saying, this doesn't feel good. This is not what we should be doing. We need to just, this is not, we're just rushing into this, you know, and now we see this big bubble and then a crash in tech. And it was really cool to see the CEO saying, we should have paid better attention. And I'm hoping that's going to give a better voice to CHROs, but sentiment or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really true. We felt that at Cisco for sure. And we were not one of the ones that overhired significantly in that space. And as a recruiting organization, it felt like, oh, because the talent market was so tough at that time. Because people were throwing money at any candidate that came in front of them. That's obviously an exaggeration, but that's what it felt like in tech. And so being able to then compete for talent for an appropriate amount of talent and not blowing the bank to do so, it really set us up better for success to say, okay, we don't have to scale back at the speed and depth that some other organizations had to. Do we have to transform? We did. And that then obviously gave us the opportunity to look at internal movement as well, which, you know, Christine, is a large passion of mine. I could talk about that for days as well, but being able to say, okay, what skills do we have as recruiters that then help map people to the new opportunities, as opposed to exiting and rehiring? We can actually say, what talent do we have here, and use recruiting skills to map those opportunities together with the people. So that's kind of how I've seen that particular scenario play out in terms of, you know, a run on talent, and how it didn't necessarily play out in our space, but we saw it because of the competition.
And, you know, just that movement, we're all persevering through inflation, right? But that really jacked up the cost per hire by jacking up salaries, period, right? So that had a lot to do with it. And I do think that is something that's caused CFOs to sit up and listen a little bit more. But kudos to you too, Kathryn, because, you know, you were talking about this at the beginning of last year, looking at your internal talent and really managing your, you know, understanding what talent you have and what you need to train to and what you really do need to go outside to before most people, right? Most companies were not really looking at, they were saying, well, what can we do? And I thought it was interesting too, being part of a few conversations where the board of CEOs coming back and saying, why are we training these people? I'm like, well, we've been asking for a training budget, for 60 odd years and it hasn't happened. So, you know, now it's like, oh, wait, that's another way that we can train it. So I think we're seeing a lot of technology pieces that are coming out about training, creating your own training, using different kinds of training modules. But I think we need to be smart and look across the field and say, what talent do I have internally? What are my referrals and how do they even out with this? What do my incoming and what do my source or my passive seekers, and putting those 4 together and selecting from there, right? And of course, internal gets weighted more, right? there's a big discussion. Jess, you could probably talk about this better, about should referrals be heavily weighted, right? And does it depend on the referral? Anything to add about that, Jess? The different kinds of referrals that are out there?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking recently with the client I was working with, we had a lot of referrals and it was a industry that everyone knows everyone, but really, we suggested, let's look at a different profile of candidate, a market you haven't really tapped into. So when we got to the end of our hiring initiative, we did performance metrics. So looking at quality of hire, those referrals, did they do as good as the candidates that we took out of a totally different pool that may not have been within the industry? And really looking at, how are the referrals performing? How long are they staying within the company? And what's in the end, this is a sales position, what's the ROI of a referral as compared to someone that was an external candidate that didn't know anyone within the company or in the industry when they started? So to me, looking at those quality metrics and comparison to referrals can be very valuable.
And that's the kind of strategy and metrics that we're talking. So from source of hire to production and everything in between, as you track that, you're able to say this source or referrals are creating this much production. And there's a time and a place for every one of these, right? Another misnomer we see is, we'll just keep filling positions with the candidates that are applying. And now we're hearing a lot about retention. Companies are saying they want to retain, and we're hearing from employees that they want to be retained. Younger generations coming into the workforce are saying that they do want more longevity. They don't have to be committed to a large organization if they feel there's a safety net in mid-market or a small organization, if they feel like their purpose is attached. So as we, look towards the future and even, polling your candidates. I don't know if you do this at all, Kathryn, but one of the things that we've had good success with, especially in the B2C climate, although it works really well with B2B too, from a talent acquisition perspective, you're sitting in the business, you know the objectives, and you're talking to so many candidates that are giving you information that you can't get from Gartner, that you can't get from Mercer, that you can't get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? Really good metrics and really good information collected firsthand by a recruiter. Have you had any wins with that?
We have for sure, especially as it relates to comp expectations, right? In the engineering space, being able to say, especially during that time where things were being thrown at, dollars and stock and everything were being thrown at people. That wasn't showing up yet because there's a lag in any of the Bureau of Labor Statistics information and things like that, right? So our recruiters were capturing all of that information to say, this is what it really will take to get to folks right now. We were able to take that to our comp partners and say, here's what realistic looks like right now. To be able to make some differentiation to say, okay, what are our market reference ranges that we use for compensation? Do we need to shift them right now? If so, by how much, for how long, all of those different things. So we have been able to influence based on recruiter firsthand conversations with candidates.
Invaluable data.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest metrics that you'll hear us talk a lot about, I don't know if you and I have talked about this so much, Kathryn, but I know we did a whole webinar on it. And just, we can include a link to the cost of vacancy calculator, especially living in vicarious times, right? So we started working with cost of vacancy in one of the earlier recessional periods in 2000, because we had a client that was saying, our managers are saying they can do the job and they're laying their staff off, and we think this is actually costing us money. And that's where we came in and said, well, how much does it truly cost to have a position open? And before I get to that, I'd like to just share something that we do here at People Science. And I think you heard Jess start to say this, but in recruiting, there's a lot of emotions. There's people. This is one of the reasons you'll see, leaders and in the C-suite saying no one can fix this because it's people. And it's not like making widgets or making routers or chips or whatever the case is. There's a lot of factors that you can't control. And as recruiters too, it's because we're dealing with people, it gets very emotional, right? And if you're on the hunt and you're really trying to fill that position, it feels like nobody wants the job. We wind up in this mental trap of there's not enough people for the job. LinkedIn is the only thing that can save the day. I cannot tell you how many times our middle managers have said to their staff, no, you don't need more seats there. You need to get creative in where you're going, because emotions lie, numbers don't, right? I'm not going to say in your entire life, because I believe in emotions and I believe in intuition. But when it comes to our work, we need to concentrate really and be open to the fact that what we think is really working may not be working. And measurement is what's going to get us there. So understanding the metrics are really important. And when we talk about cost of vacancy, so if you think of cost of vacancy in the terms of a profit and loss statement per position, what is the true cost of this position and what's the true revenue that comes from this position, or net that comes from this, and think in those terms, then you know whether or not it should be a position that even continues in your organization. Should it be outsourced? And if it should be outsourced, at what price? Who gets filled first? The hiring manager understanding the value of them being in the seat and doing the actual interview, as compared to postponing it for 2 weeks, right? Because, true story, we had a guy in the Virgin Islands that was a holding company, bought a company in the Virgin Islands, the cable company in the Virgin Islands, and they couldn't get people. You think everybody wants to move there. Not true. You go there and there's one ship that comes once a year, that kind of thing. And they were hiring people and they were losing it. So they wind up with one network guy. And this guy is on a moped, literally driving around islands, fixing the different stations. So we're their RPO partner. We're sending him tons and tons of candidates, and he's got to interview them. And he's like, no, shut up. I'm making progress. I don't have time to do this. So the misnomer was, if he would take an hour from doing and look at these, that we could get him the candidates. So the cost of vacancy was like $1,600 a day. Right. So once we said to him, well, it's costing the company $1,600 a day every day you don't interview, he changed his mind, and we were able to encourage him to look at the different. We actually did have to have a recruiter on a moped following him around again to do that. I mean, that's an extreme example, but there's a lot of power in that cost of vacancy. We have a calculator that you can use as a sample. The other big plus with the cost of vacancy is that it's real hard to do without finance being involved, right? You really want to get good metrics, you've got to go to. And if you're in a situation where you don't have a relationship with finance, how can that not affect the worth of your organization, right? So it's a good reason to come to finance, and it's a good reason to build a relationship with finance where you're saying, I am smart, we are smart in TA, we know what we're doing, we want to work on the best positions and line them up effectively where they need to go. So we're working on cost of vacancy. And I have never seen it fail. Once you line up with your finance department, it changes the game completely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's 100% spot on, both in terms of planning, but also being able to talk to them about the cost of vacancy. That helps them with the triangle of speed, cost, and quality, right? Being able to say, you can, interview 100 people if you'd like to, because you want to see just one more, just one more, just one more. But being able to say it's costing you that $1,600 a day you used, that then helps to frame it for them to say, is seeing one more person worth this to you, and letting them make that determination.
There's so much power in it. I think there's a deck on there too, but if you need more information, let us know. But certainly it's a free service, that we have that gives you the outline on how to do it. And it is the game changer. And just heading back, did we have questions, Jess? Did I see a couple of questions that came in? It's a good time
yeah, some of them we've addressed. I know a lot of people just want to hear again, what are some of the most effective and useful metrics that we've used in the past, and success stories of those.
Awesome. My favorite, decline reasons. They tell you everything about who you are in the market. You may think you may have an employee value proposition that you've invested your time and money in. You may be completely focused on it, and every consultant in the world's telling you you're moving in the right direction, especially advertising companies. And then you ignite it and you start to collect the information, and you're finding out why they're declining. So here are some of the things that come from decline reasons. Validation or invalidation of your employee value proposition. So if I'm trying to recruit Kathryn and she says, you know what, Chris, thanks, but no thanks. And I say, you know, why are you not interested? And Kathryn says, I thought you were a tech company, but I see you're striving, true story, striving to be a tech company, and I need to be in a tech. So there's, you know, a case there where a company was moving further into tech. They had a good plan to get there, but it was going to take them quite a few years. And they were trying to hire people in the tech field that they really weren't ready for. So that's one part of the employee value proposition. Salary comparison, I think, Kathryn, you brought that up, right? Is there a way that that's moved the needle? That's legit, right? It's like, this is not what the market says. This is what the candidates that work at this company have told us they're making.
Yep.
It's a huge difference. It's, to me, decline reasons are the real glass door.
Yeah. For me, I'll be super honest with you. It's hard to pick just one that's my favorite because it really depends on what problem I'm trying to solve. There are so many metrics. You know, I would open it up to you. I'll talk about a few of mine, but then you all who are here on the webinar, drop into the chat some of the problems that you're curious about, like what metrics would you use for this thing? And we can kind of brainstorm through with you. But if we're having trouble moving the needle with our internal team, sometimes it's hiring manager sentiment. What are they feeling about their engagement with us? Are we able to see where the pinpoint where the problem is so we can enable them in a way that will then get us in a better partnership so we can move forward productively? Is it, you know, our cost per hire? Going back to your conversation about the importance of partnering with finance, being able to say, we know it costs us this much to hire a person, and then you can use that based on your various different channels, sourcing channels. You can take a look at it holistically to say, are we off the mark here? For us, when I took this role, I took a look at our cost per hire and I was like, this is outrageous. What is going on here? And that told me that we had a ton of agency spend, about $1 million every quarter that we were spending on agency when we had a fully staffed organization. So being able to take a look at that and say, we're actually going to scale that back down, cut 33% out of our run rate every quarter, and still delivered a better service to the organization because we were acting as partners and we know what the organization was looking for. So again, that's, you know, two examples that I could give you, but it completely depends on what problem you're trying to solve for what metric I might recommend. Basically, it's what problem does it solve for, or what behavior are you trying to change? Those are the two things I look at when I'm looking at metrics.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, the most essential metrics, it's important to keep in mind that they really need to be strategic and quantified with big picture impacts. So having them being focused on the near future, so leaders have time to react or make changes, and obviously having them be actionable, right? So when they indicate a challenge, there's a strategy to actually increase the business impacts of recruiting. I've really found that the quality of hire metrics are the most interesting to me. And I think you can really pull a lot of value from those. So having quality metrics can give you a full understanding of the impact and effectiveness of your whole hiring process on the organization's success. So giving TA and the organizations the ability to make informed decisions about recruitment strategies that will continually improve your quality of hire, which in turn improves the company's ROI. Some examples of quality metrics that I like would be performance ratings. And keep in mind, you want to tie these quality metrics all the way back to source of hire. So you can really pinpoint where are these quality hires coming from. So in the future, you can have a better strategy for recruiting future hires. So things like looking at where does your source of hire tie into their performance ratings? What is their time to productivity? What's the retention rate? So, you know, is the retention rate higher for candidates that are from an internship or candidates that are just recruiting externally? What's the job satisfaction rate? So you're able to look at retention probability. What's the manager satisfaction rate? So are your managers more satisfied with candidates that came to you through a referral? Or are they more satisfied with candidates that came externally? And then I think really most importantly, candidate and employee experience ratings. So looking at those metrics and tying them back to the source will give you a lot of insight on how to strategize for the future and where recruiting dollars are best spent.
Yeah.
I think another metric that's hardly captured and overlooked is time to find,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
You can
and
really drill down and find a lot of bottlenecks when you're looking at time to find.
it helps you, like, it's crazy when we come in and we do, say you do an intake call and the expectation is we need this filled in the next 30 days, right? But if you have time to find data that shows, and this is a true metric, that it takes 17 days to engage a passive seeker who's at a salary level of 55 and above, it takes 17 days to engage them on average. Then you can start to say, well, it's gonna take me 17 days, and you can make accurate predictions instead of saying, yeah, I could fill that in 30 days. And now your whole desk is upside down and backwards, right? And the cost of vacancy for that position might be $300 a day as compared to $1,600 somewhere else. But that now moves to the front of the page because that squeaky wheel got it. When that could be a different conversation. It could be, this is a critical position. We need to look at passive seeking. We know it's going to take us 17 days to engage them. Based on the time to interview, we're looking more at 45 or 50 days. So you can make accurate projections when you understand, I'll call it top of the funnel for recruiting purposes, not for candidates coming in, but from a recruiting standpoint. So the rec opens, what are the tools that you're going to use? What are the most effective? And really understanding this, I think when we come in as an RPO in particular, we do a big investigation, right? So what are the tools you've been using, how they've been working? And we'll see so much redundancy stuck on one tool, like I said about LinkedIn. So really understanding what's coming from the tools that you have, and also understanding what's in your arsenal, what you need to add, right? What kind of relationships do, and once you're collecting that data, you have a lot of power, like we said, to go back to them. So understanding what's getting and what the timeline is to use those tools, right? So your time to fill, or your time to find, which is different than your time to engage, right? So your time to find, you might be able to do in 1 day or 2 days. And then your time to engage may be the 17 or maybe 5, whatever the case is. But understanding recruiter production is very important when it comes to filling the requisitions, making the right kind of recommendations, and workforce planning. Right? I think we don't want to see what happened a few years ago with just getting people, and let's hire tons and tons and tons of recruiters, when we really should be smarter than that and understand that there's going to be times when we need to scale, and how do we manage that differently as compared to hiring a bunch of recruiters. Maybe you make sure you have partners ready ahead of time, but understanding your own recruiters' production, I think, makes for better decisions. And what you do with that data educates you on what you need to train to. Kathryn, if we go back to what you're talking about, recruiting's become very sophisticated. It's no longer that one generalist can do everything, right? You need a sourcing engine. You need to manage and give a good candidate experience to everybody, but especially to the incoming, right? And if you've got 300 incoming and it's one person, that's kind of hard to do, isn't it? And then manage your referrals and then look at your internal talent. So you need somebody who can process engineer. That's Jess's bailiwick, right? Process engineering all the way through. And we have a different division here where recruiters, we have Lindsay Roundtree as our director of recruiting. She tag teams with Jess, but they're two different skill sets completely. And then when we look at our recruiting team, sourcing and the capability to source is very different than the capability to qualify in many cases. And some of your recruiters might crisscross it, right? They might crisscross, but understanding what they can produce and what their talent sets are. And instead of trying to put a fish in a tree and then getting mad because they can't perform, or outplacing them because they haven't been able to do the job, and saying, what can I train this person to? Or do I just put them in a situation where we reside on their strengths?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think when people are placed where they have strengths, they're definitely going to be thriving in a way that the productivity levels are going to increase for sure. So rather than fighting against it, it's leveraging that to go ahead. And I know there were some follow-ups. So Jess, you want to throw some follow-up questions over to Christine?
Sure. So Amber asked, where can we find metrics like 17 days to engage a passive candidate?
You know what I mean? That number actually came from Lever ATS, and then it was validated by HCI. So we use the internet, right? Like crazy, but
for
and
benchmarking.
you see there, and then we look to find other documentation that will support it. So it does take investigating, although I will say with the generative AI, it's made it a lot easier. Now we have consult that we keep on call all the time, right? If we're coming into a situation, we need to evaluate a market. But I think our team internally does just as well doing their own investigation and then going back to our own metrics, right? We have a lot of metrics, as all of us do. And when you're collecting them and they're in a good place. So for example, one of our clients was thinking about bringing, adding a new segment to their stack, to a burglar system, to a telecommunications company. And they had done a lot of homework in the way of, they worked with Mercer, they gave them what they thought the bonus structure should look like. Before they pulled the plug, they called us and said, you've been doing direct sales reps for us for a lot of years. We had a slew of candidates who had worked for a burglar company. We were able to go in and get a myopic on 7 different markets and find out exactly what their salaries were, which was quite contrary to what the information Mercer had given them. So don't underestimate your own investigative ability and your own data. So I would start with the internet, try to get the verbiage that you need, use ChatGPT, look at what the consults are telling you. And gosh, there are so many advisors in TA, right? But it does tend to be expensive. I don't think you always need to use it. I think you start with your own and get your own metrics going as much as you can, and then compare as you move along. And Kathryn, you could probably answer this as well. What's been your experience?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think looking at the reams of information that are available on the internet is a good starting place. And then I'm a huge proponent of piloting things. I see a question here around what metrics do we have on successful job descriptions? What makes a good job description? Is it brevity? Is it in-depth detail, that sort of a thing? And again, I would say I think that depends. You could probably find some research on it somewhere, but the dependency would be on who are you targeting? How are they reading the information? And then potentially, I would say pilot, try a short version, try a long version, see which one's getting more responses qualified from the candidates that you're looking for. And that's what you should go for you. Use some intelligence from what you can gather outside, but then also don't be afraid to try things. We are a 84,000 person organization at Cisco. It's not always, people have a little bit of risk tolerance challenge in some instances, in my perspective, but what's the harm in sending out 10 job descriptions that are short, 10 job descriptions that are longer, and seeing which ones perform better?
A/B testing.
As an example, right?
And collecting those declined reasons, right?
Well, yeah, for sure.
Disposition reasons, not just the decline. Why isn't it? Keeping track of that data so you don't revert back to what it feels like, right? You want to come into this objective as being as objective as possible.
100%.
Compared to like trying to prove your case. I would go in an about face on that one. Try to disprove yourself and see what you come back with.
Yeah. Anytime we're trying to do something new, I would say try to think what metrics what metrics will define success for us before we even start the process, rather than trying to reverse engineer and say, oh, what should we be measuring now? What does success look like? How do we measure it? And then build that into the process from the start.
And I love that point. Like start with the metrics that you already have, and then decide where to go from there. And I think as far as like quick wins are concerned, consider your source of hire. How much is it really costing you for Indeed? We did an evaluation on a company that was, I don't forget if it was Indeed, I can't remember if it was Indeed, but it was the popular job board of the day. I've been around long enough to see these things circulate, right? And they said that their cost per hire on Indeed was $400 a hire. It was $1,400. You cannot expect your supplier or your point service to tell you accurately how much it's costing you per hire. That's like, getting the hen in the,
that one should be
rooster in the hen house or whatever.
That one should be a relatively simple one, right? How much are you spending with them? How many hires are you getting out? What's the productivity from those people, right? Like that should be a relatively simple one. You don't need to rely on them to give you that data.
Right. Like, well, that's what it looked like. But when you delved into it, it was also a classification issue, right? Knowing your ATS when it comes to these numbers is really important. We had we wanted to test an ATS to see where the candidate sources were coming from, because we were suspicious that everything seemed to be coming from places that didn't make sense to us. So all we did is in the ATS, we switched the first part of the drop down. So the candidate, how did you hear about the position? Hit the drop down. We changed it to an obscure Alaskan community. And we saw a 25% uptick in candidates coming from Alaska that were nowhere near this region, and certainly weren't, because what does the candidate do? What's easy? They took the first drop down and used it. So it's challenging your own internal systems to make sure that, if you've got outsiders like candidates in there, you've got to validate that information too. More questions? Yes, I see more questions coming in.
I would say before we
Yes.
jump to another question, I just say we have to make sure our recruiters are using the information accurately as well. Because sometimes in an environment where we are asking them, sorry, I've got a thumbs up because I use my hands a lot. When we are in an environment where we're asking them to do a lot of things and carry a lot of volume, they sometimes may take the easy route as well, and understanding the implications of bad data on what we might be able to pull from a metrics perspective as well. So setting that expectation accordingly and holding accountability for putting things in appropriately.
Absolutely. And I think also letting the recruiters know that this data can help empower them. So when they're speaking with managers, they're more of an advisor. They can explain the candidate market. They can explain that it takes this many times to outreach a source candidate to get them on the line. So I think letting them know it empowers them will push them a little bit to make sure they're using it the right way. Okay. So we had a question. This one goes back to the quality metrics I was talking about. How do you ascertain job satisfaction and hiring manager satisfaction for quality of hire? So that can really vary depending upon what your organization has decided to do in regards to grading performance. Some use performance reviews that hiring managers are completing, or as you mentioned in the question, Angie, periodic surveys, even recruiters checking in and following up with the hiring managers. How did this candidate do that we placed for you? So I think setting what you want the process to be and defining how you're going to gauge performance with the employees and the hiring managers is important, and totally up to whatever works best for that organization.
Something that we use here that I sit in on monthly is the hiring manager satisfaction report. Now, we do survey. It's part of our KPIs, but this comes from the recruiters. Every single stakeholder in the interview process, in the hiring process, whether it's the hiring manager, the hiring managers, support people, whoever it is assigned to a recruiter, and that recruiter is responsible for the satisfaction of the hiring manager. So we really do look at this as a service, and they can grade unsatisfactory, satisfactory, and the objective for the recruiter, and they're compensated sometimes for this, is to get them to advocacy, not happy, advocacy. Like this person who's servicing me is so good that I would recommend them to somebody else. And that's how we measure and build that connection with them.
And that relays into this next question, Christine. So someone asked, what are your favorite metrics to use to gauge recruiter productivity performance? I would definitely say going back to that client satisfaction report that we have in place, but also, first giving them targeted goals that they're expected to hit. Sometimes you can just start with the basic ones, right? So how many candidates have you sourced? If you're expected to source 30, are they hitting that number? And then looking at how many phone screens are completed and looking at how many offers. I mean, those are very basic, but I think it's important to make sure they have a targeted goal in place that's realistic and makes sense. And having this data, you can go back and historically look at positions that you filled and how much did it take to get to a hire. So having historical data in place to set goals and then tracking your recruiter's performance against those goals is a great way to measure performance. Anyone want to add to that?
Start from the beginning. If all you have is point services, start with the point service information. But drawing the line and you have to make some proclamations up front, but most of us have this data already, right? So if you're saying these customer support positions that you were talking, Kathryn, that you want to see those filled in 30 days. Well, how many, now we go to the recruiter and we say, in order to get the 30 days, just work it back. How many candidates do we need to source for? How many candidates referrals? There's 4 channels that we talked about in incoming. and set that in motion. Then monitor it as this is the key thing, monitoring the production as it happens. So let's say Jess is the recruiter on this and she's scheduled for PTO and this is a tight fit. We know that she's going to fall behind on Thursday and Friday. We need to augment what she's doing to get there. I mean, this is the science, the business process that you would use if you were making a router, right? You would say, I need to make sure I can fill for this. So think in terms of true recruiter production. How can you get there? If you're on this call and you don't have a tool, which I don't know that you would have one specific tool. That's why we created one. I don't mean to keep pushing the product, but I am offering you the ability to take a look at the tool, and we are offering the tool at a reasonable price for people to get accustomed to it. But if you're not doing that, start a spreadsheet, start an Access database, use Power BPI, start putting together your own metrics so that you can judge this. Start with one rec first, but looking at the beginning. So it opened on this day. How many candidates do I need to source? How long is it going to take me to engage them? Then of the ones that have engaged, how many do I suspect will be qualified? Of those that are qualified, how many will go? The whole minute process, take it across the board and see how you're measuring from there. And that there's gold mine. That is a gold mine of data. Did that help? I know there's been a lot of questions.
Yeah, we are at the end of the hour. So we will be sending out an email to everyone that attended or registered for the webinar today. If you had a question that we didn't get to, feel free to respond to that email and I'll be happy to get you an answer. We are going to include a link to the cost of vacancy calculator that Christine spoke about earlier, and the graph of the men and women salary comparison inequalities. We'll include that, as well as a copy to rewatch this webinar if you'd like, or share it with anyone within your network.
You can, somebody just asked how they could find out more. Just message us back. You can message us back on the email that we sent to you, and I just put my own email in there. So I'll funnel you towards the right people who can help out. Kathryn, thank you so much for coming on. You you're an amazing person. This is exactly what I think we're seeing so many people in TA aspire to. Thank you for your good work.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate having met you and in continuing the conversation, because I think you are doing such great work in advancing the conversation around talent acquisition. So thank you for what you do.
We're all going to get there. All righty. Thanks again. And we'll see you next month. And we'll be talking about the relationship with hiring managers. Right. Bye now.
Bye.